On the eastern edge of Atlanta lies a neighborhood that many outsiders fear to enter. A patchwork of cracked sidewalks, corner stores, and murals that pulse with life. To some, this is a war zone. Yet to others, it's the cradle of modern rap. In other words, this is Zone 6, a place where danger and creativity share the same streets. But things haven't always been this way. You see, if we turn back the hands of time, East Atlanta was once an orderly community of tidy bungalows and streets. But over the decades, prosperity faded, crime rose, and the neighborhood's name came to be shorthand for chaos. In fact, according to Atlanta Police Department data, calls related to drugs and narcotics nearly doubled in 2023 alone. And longtime residents claim that the streets feel more volatile than ever. Yet, behind the headlines is also a deeper story, with inconvenient details often left out. So, I guess the question is, how did a premium 19th century suburb devolve into one of the most notorious, yet culturally influential corners of the modern South? And what's life really like in Atlanta's most forbidden neighborhood? Stay tuned to find out, as today we uncover the story of Zone 6. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Let's head back to the time that this story really started, December of 1836, when the Georgia legislature approved construction of the Western and Atlantic Railroad, a line meant to connect the port of Savannah with the expanding American Midwest. To determine where that line should end, the state hired Stephen Harriman Long, a civil engineer and former U.S. Army major. Long surveyed a wilderness deep in North Georgia and selected a simple endpoint, a spot he found suitable for, quote, one tavern, a blacksmith shop, and a grocery store. That outpost became known as Terminus, a fitting name for the railroad's end. From there, the tracks brought people, and the people built homes. Within just a few years, a little settlement gained a new name, Marthasville, after the governor's daughter. And then, in 1847, its final title arrived, Atlanta. The coinage came from engineer J.I.D. Thomas, who proposed a feminine echo of Atlantic. The name stuck, and soon trains from Charleston, Savannah, and beyond converged on the new city. By the 1850s, Atlanta was booming, powered by sawmills, foundries, and the rhythmic thunder of locomotives. But its fate would shift dramatically when war came. In 1861, the Civil War erupted. Atlanta became a vital Confederate hub, and its rail yards and factories served the Southern Army. Though in 1864, Union forces under General William T. Sherman launched a campaign to capture the city. This was the Battle of Atlanta, fought partly in what is now East Atlanta Village. Notoriously, this battle claimed the lives of both Union General James B. McPherson and Confederate General William H. T. Walker. Two opposing commanders fell on the same day and in the same fields. With that in mind, when Atlanta ultimately fell, the then mayor ordered an evacuation of civilians. From there, Sherman's men torched the city in their march to the sea, leaving behind nothing but ashes, burnt churches, and little else. But from that destruction rose a symbol that defines Atlanta to this day, the phoenix, a reminder of rebirth through fire. That's right. After the war, the city rebuilt. Newly freed men seeking work arrived by the thousands, and Atlanta grew into a crossroads of both opportunity and tension. Racial lines hardened, fortunes diverged, and new neighborhoods, including what would become East Atlanta, or Zone 6, began to take shape on its expanding edge. By the late 19th century, East Atlanta stood apart as a self-contained township beyond the city's eastern boundary. It wasn't yet part of Atlanta, not officially, but its growth mirrored the city's own optimism. The first major business here was the Marbut Mirror Mercantile Store, a sprawling operation that sold everything from groceries to horse feed, kind of like a Walmart. And around it, a small commercial district emerged, complete with a bank, blacksmith, and even a silent movie theater. This was not a coincidence, as the area's first land planners envisioned something almost utopian, though there was also political interest at play, as former Georgia Governor Joseph Emerson Brown owned large tracts of land here, land which he developed into a grid of shaded streets wrapped around a 13-acre green space. That's right, this was an early model of planned suburban living. And it didn't take long before homes rose along the streetcar lines linking East Atlanta right to downtown. For middle-class white families, it was an ideal blend of comfort and access, though those comforts were never equally shared since property deeds in East Atlanta, like much of the South, often carried racial covenants, explicitly barring black residents from buying homes. Segregation wasn't just a social norm, it was actually city policy. Even so, throughout the early 20th century, East Atlanta thrived as an upper-middle-class enclave. The East Atlanta Banking Company financed even more new construction, such as the Suburban, which was built by a railroad baron for his bride, and it stood as a type of local landmark, a symbol of prosperity. But beyond these tree-lined streets, the city was changing fast. Homes to institutions such as Morehouse College, Spielman College, and Clark Atlanta University. Though perhaps most notably, in 1929, a young boy named Martin Luther King Jr. was born just a few miles away in Sweet Auburn. And since his neighborhood faced many of these same segregation issues, he would come to nurture a generation of thinkers that would transform America. By the mid-century, the civil rights movement was rewriting Atlanta's identity. Black citizens organized boycotts, marches, and voter drives. The effects were visible. Segregation began to crack. Public transportation desegregated in 1959, restaurants in 1961, theaters in 1963, and finally, by 1973, schools. But this progress came at a cost. As integration advanced, many white families fled the intercity, a phenomenon known as white flight. They sold their homes cheaply and moved into newly built suburbs north of the city. In their absence, they drained the economic lifeblood of the region, leaving behind little more than hollow storefronts and fading streets. What had once been a symbol of stability was now standing on the edge of decline, and the crime that would follow was beyond anyone's imagination. Actually, this unexpected spike in crime really surprised people, or in terms you might better relate to, it's kind of like how cybercrime has encroached on our modern world and no one saw it coming. You see this card I'm holding? It had a rough life. Not because it expired, but because it had to be canceled after someone tried to use my data. How did they get it? Well, that's where things get shady. Companies known as data brokers collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, even social media, and then they sell it to the highest bidder, all legal and all without you knowing. And that's precisely what led me to try Delete Me, the sponsor of today's episode. Delete Me is a service that scans hundreds of online databases to find your personal information and delete it. But it doesn't just do that once. It keeps monitoring throughout the year to make sure that it doesn't show up again. When I got my first privacy report, I was shocked to see how many sites had my information, old addresses, phone numbers, and even family details. Fortunately, all of it was removed within days. The best part is that Delete Me doesn't outsource the work. They do it themselves. And if you need help with something specific, they've got real people to assist you. There's a reason Wirecutter named it the best data removal service this year. So if you want to start taking back control of your privacy, use my code, SOCASH at joindeleteme.com/SOCASH and get 20% off your plan. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video and helping more people take back control of their data. But now, back to the story. By the 1970s, East Atlanta had entered freefall. The factories and warehouses that once provided steady employment followed the departing populations to suburban industrial parks. Local banks redlined the district, labeling it high risk, which meant no loans, no investment, no insurance, and no chance of renewal. In other words, the people living there were legally doomed. A 1980 federal study titled Characteristics of High and Low Crime Neighborhoods in Atlanta confirmed what residents already knew. Neighborhoods with low income and limited access to credit suffered disproportionately high crime. East Atlanta was caught in a vicious loop. Poverty invited neglect, and neglect fueled crime. And that crime seemed to just justify more neglect. Many efforts were made to resolve this tragic state of affairs. Churches and community groups launched youth leagues and mentorship programs, but they were fighting an uphill battle against unstoppable decay. By the turn of the century, Zone 6 became shorthand for the entire area under the Atlanta Police Department's 6th Patrol Zone, a boundary that stretched across East Atlanta, Kirkwood, and Edgewood. The term soon took on a dark life of its own. Drug use and violent crime rose sharply in the early 2000s. By 2023, narcotic-related police calls had doubled compared to the previous year, while thefts rose by nearly 20%, and the homicide rates also doubled, reflecting a city struggling to contain its disparities. At this point, Zone 6 was already notorious locally, but a 2023 case made national headlines when 2 masked gunmen fired dozens of rounds into an elderly woman's home. Police later suggested they had targeted the wrong address, and by sheer luck, no one was hurt. But her son's pillow, resting on his bed, was pierced by bullets. And with that imagery, the nation took notice. These weren't isolated incidences either. They reflected a community trapped between neglect and survival. Yet, even among that violence, something unexpected happened. Art flourished. That's right. Out of those crumbling houses and corner studio apartments emerged a new kind of storytelling, raw, unfiltered, and deeply local. In the mid-2000s, Gucci Mane began rapping about East Atlanta's streets, proudly branding his neighborhood's identity. His 2006 track, Zone 6, made the code famous, and soon other artists followed. There was Future, another Atlanta native who carried the sound to international fame. By 2017, Young Nudy and 21 Savage had turned their own corner of Zone 6 into cultural shorthand for authenticity in a place where survival and artistry somehow intertwined. This was best expressed in EA, their collaborative anthem, which painted a vivid portrait of home, both dangerous and proud. The lyrics weren't just musical, they were social records, documenting the fallout of urban neglect and the strength required to live through it. By the late 2010s, a new voice also joined that mix, J.I.D, whose lyrics bridged the worlds of art and reality. Or, as he rapped, from the city that doesn't see the sun, either you're a sinner or a citizen. His words captured the paradox of Zone 6, a place both condemned and celebrated. Today, East Atlanta stands at a crossroads, one where pain, progress, and pride intersect every day. The graffiti and murals that cover the walls there maybe tell the story better than any statistic ever could. Some commemorate fallen friends, others celebrate resilience and messages of hope. And surprisingly, despite the perceived danger, each May, residents gather for East Atlanta Craft Beer Festival in Brownwood Park, a reminder that the community still thrives there. Even so, there could be more bad news on the horizon as Atlanta's recent population boom has made housing increasingly unaffordable, and gentrification threatens to price out long-term residents. However, the city's comprehensive development effort Plan A aims to reverse that pattern by investing in underfunded neighborhoods like Zone 6. The initiative invites residents to imagine their community in 5, 10, and even 15 years into the future. And with hope, their vision will shape what comes next. Change won't come easily, but East Atlanta has risen from the ashes before, and hopefully will do so again. That's the story of Zone 6, and if anyone is watching from there, please share your personal perspective in the comments below and let us know what life is really like. Otherwise, until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.